chapter 13 about urban environments. It's page 331. This case study is about Portland, Oregon, and how they're managing their city's growth and developing something called an urban growth boundary. An urban area is a city of more than 2,500 people, and a rural area is less than that. Suburban is an urban area on the outskirts of a city center. So Houston is extremely spread out, and so we have a lot of suburbs surrounding Houston. So reasons people move to cities from rural areas, it includes access, more opportunities to jobs, better access to healthcare. Usually we have better healthcare in cities, especially in Houston. We have the medical center. And then usually there's better education, better colleges. Other reasons why people might move to cities, especially in developing nations, are famine, war, environmental degradation. Right now, we're moving from rural areas into urban areas as globally, especially developing nations. So if a family has 8 kids and they're farmers, one of their kids will take over the farm. The rest of them will have to look for work, and the jobs are in the cities. So they will move to cities. On page 334, reasons people move to suburbs. So people, once they move to cities, they will move into suburbs, which are surrounding cities, and that will add to sprawl. Urban sprawl is the movement of people into low density areas. So they have single homes on plots of land. There's more space. Houston is particularly sprawled out more than even other big cities. We are known for that. If you live in Houston, you have to have a car because everything is in the city is so sprawled out. There are so many suburbs. And so the reason people move to suburbs is because they started moving to suburbs because the availability of cars and roads. So after World War II, gas was cheap, cars were affordable for the average person, and so people started moving out and then driving to work into the city. Usually people who are more affluent will move to the suburbs. There will be cheaper homes in the suburbs. So a home in, let's say, Katy or Sugar Land is cheaper than a home inside of Houston, inside of trendier areas like Midtown or Montrose. And so people will want yards, they'll want more land, better schools are in suburbs, there's less crime, and there's usually less pollution. But living in suburbs does contribute to more car pollution because you're driving more than if you were living in the city. So know 5 negative impacts of sprawl. So they're all in green. Make sure you read these. Transportation, people will drive more. So there will be more air pollution because of that. And then also there's more opportunities for oil to get into the water. And people will depend more on oil. And so that will lead to more pollution. Also health, air pollution, but also physical inactivity will lead to obesity. People are driving, so they're walking less. And then land use. So there's more land being developed and less for agriculture or just left as forests or grasslands. And then economics as well. So when people move into suburbs, especially wealthy people, they take their tax dollars with them. And so like someone in Katy, their residential tax dollars are going to go to Katy and not to Houston. So the infrastructure in Katy, like money used for roads and schools and public buildings will be much better, in a much better condition than in the city. Make sure you know what city planning is, and then regional planning. So there's city planning like Houston planning, and then regional planning has to do more with areas that aren't particularly in the city, like in Houston, like in Galena Park. We we have to kind of get with city planners in order to regionally plan as well. Also know what zoning is. Municipal, you'll hear municipal a lot in this class, and it has to do with the city. So municipal waste is city waste. Municipal land is the land of the city, not of the state. Know 2 to 3 smart growth principles. So now cities are trying to go towards smart growth, and so making cities more walkable, having more green spaces, more open spaces. Mixed land uses mean that there's parks and there's residential areas, like there's homes right next to like restaurants and grocery stores, so everything's really walkable, close, and green, cost efficient, all of those things. So this is happening in a lot of cities. It's kind of a revitalization of a city, and it aims to not let sprawl happen. So instead of growing horizontally, growing vertically into a city. And so that right now that's what Portland's trying to do. Gentrification, although you don't need to know it is something that's important to know. So it's pushing in areas where there are poor people. Sometimes wealthy people will move in and push poor people out, raise tax dollars, and this happens a lot in a lot of areas in Houston. Right now it's happening in East Downtown. It's happened in Bel Air as well. Bel Air used to be filled with a lot of poor people, a lot of minorities, but now it's one of the wealthier parts of Houston. And so that has to do kind of with environmental justice issues. Know the importance of parks. This is New York Central Park. Having parks leads to better air quality, scenic beauty, recreation. Climate regulation. No greenways and green belts. In Houston, we are right now building a green belt that links bayous together. So they're green spaces where people can, like trails that people can run on, bike on. Austin also has a green belt that runs through Austin. That's really nice. And ours should be built by next year, by 2020. Know what green buildings are? LEED buildings are green buildings that are just certified. So there are different levels of the certification, like silver, gold, platinum. There's a lot of LEED buildings in Houston. We're the city with the 3rd most LEED certified buildings in the U.S. Know 3 to 4 features of green buildings. So there is energy efficient or water efficient sinks, toilets, landscaping with native plants. You don't have to water your plants as much or add fertilizers or pesticides. Eco roofs, they insulate, they reduce runoff, and they absorb CO2. Having trees, it shades your home, making it cooler, and then the leaves will fall in the winter and let your home be heated a little more. And PV cells, photovoltaic cells, they help produce electricity. In a city or urbanization, there are some pros and cons. So some benefits of cities is that there's a higher population density, so that means that there's more intact ecosystems outside of the city. And a really good example of that is in Japan. So in Japan, they purposely want people to live in Tokyo. 35% of the population of Japan lives in Tokyo, and that leaves pristine forests for ecosystem services elsewhere in Japan. There's usually better medical care and more efficient public services like water, plumbing, schools, things like that. Some negatives of urbanization is a resource sink. So a resource sink is, in cities, people will take resources from outside of the city. Cities don't really produce resources. There's no food being produced. Everything is taken from outside of the city. And so that can lead to resource depletion as well. Or cities contribute more to resource depletion. There's more pollution like air, water, noise, and light, and this affects the poor and minorities more than others. So in cities, there are areas where there are poor people and there are wealthy people, but the poor tend to be more affected by these things. And so that can be an environmental justice issue. In cities, they're considered heat islands, so they're hotter than the surrounding areas because of concrete and asphalt and pavement. It absorbs in heat and then lets that heat out slowly during the night. So when we pump out groundwater, take it out, the water table can fall. And so along coastal areas where there is the ocean, salt water can intrude into aquifers, and then when we pump out groundwater, it's not fresh water anymore, it's salt water. It decreases water infiltration, so it increases runoff. It increases atmospheric carbon because of the burning of fossil fuels. And generally, there's a bigger ecological footprint in cities, including suburbs, than in rural areas. We're using up more resources. And then, this is very important, impervious surfaces are surfaces like roads, buildings, and parking lots, and these decrease water infiltration, so they decrease water being absorbed into the soil, and so this affects the water cycle. It increases flooding and runoff, so the water, if there's a flash flood or a hurricane, this happens a lot in Houston. Houston is naturally a part grassland and part marshland or wetland. And so naturally, Houston should be able to absorb a whole lot of water, and so flooding does not happen. But most of Houston is developed, and so there's a lot of pavement and a lot of roads. So that's why flooding happens so much. We don't have a lot of our natural ecosystem left. And then runoff happens where water doesn't stay, it'll run off. And so that will affect the microclimate of the city. And then evaporation will decrease because runoff is happening and water is not staying in Houston. So there's less evaporation, and that can affect the climate again, or the precipitation. Transpiration, there's less vegetation, so there's less transpiration, and there's less groundwater recharge because, again, there is no soil or not enough soil and vegetation. So know this figure in caption. Know what an urban heat island effect is. So look at this figure and make sure you know what that is. Pavement, it absorbs heat in, and then during the night it will let it out. So the city is going to be warmer than the surrounding areas. And then another effect of urban areas is noise pollution. It can lead to stress. And then light pollution, it can affect sleep, and it also blocks stars. And that is it for chapter 13.